happened at the end of a shift, was it because he was coloured? And initially he said, no, this happened to all the men.
Mm.
But they kept pushing the questions until eventually he said, well, I suppose you could be right. I suppose it might be because I'm coloured.
Hmm.
Now, what they had done to that man is taken somebody who had no problem with working with his white colleagues,
Yes.
and they'd put a little seed in his mind that there was a problem.
So
Now, if I return to the husband,
yeah.
about 2 months after this diversity training, the lady went on holiday with her husband, and she said to me, by the middle of the week, I knew I had to leave him because his whole personality had changed. He was very domineering. He kept talking about us, the police, having to deal with those people outside, the general public. And he'd become very aggressive. So what she was describing to me was a personality change. And I'm going to say to you, her description fits perfectly what we're seeing in a wider sense within the police force and indeed within the public sector. Local officials becoming very elitist, very aggressive if you try and challenge them.
Yeah.
Now this is not normal, so we know that something is being done to them in order to produce this change. And I'm going to say that the overwhelming base of evidence that we've got, which includes documents and emails and recorded phone calls and testimony from witnesses and personal statements, is that people are having their normal personalities changed by techniques which are being given during courses. And this is very sinister.
Yeah, it's really, really scary as well. And in regards to the use of language that you mentioned before, it's almost like they're bringing in, the newspeak of 1984 or whatever. And again, do you think that is also a part of NLP, that you change the way people speak, the words that they use, and is that, would you say, connected with the idea of the political correctness that is on the rise as well?
Well, absolutely. Political correctness is itself a very bad term because it detracts us from what is really going on. Political correctness is cultural Marxism, and it is very simple. If you control what people say, you eventually start to control how they think.
Yeah.
And I really had a personal example of this when I was stood on the stage giving a talk to, 200 people, 150, 200 people. And I hesitated for a fraction when I wanted to start talking about white people and coloured people. Because my brain said, can I say this?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So in my mind, I was experiencing a little bit of stress because I was worried, could I use these terms? So political correctness, which is everywhere, and certainly America is suffering from this as well, but Britain is swamped with political correctness. And what this has meant is that people, in many cases, are too frightened to tell the truth, not because of what the truth is, but because what people might say under the political correct rules.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, the political correctness is part of this organized social, economic, psychological attack which is being carried out on us.
And again, the ideology that Common Purpose are driving here when they're doing their education and so forth is also about changing then the way people think about these things. And again, to veil everything in a terminology which is, well, again, on the surface supposed to be very, very non-offensive, but again, it goes away from the idea that you're not longer telling or saying things as what they really are. You know, a spade. Yes. It's time to call a spade,
at this
right?
point, I'll say I'd like to say something which I've started to introduce more and more, but when you look out there, for some people it is quite scary, because if you begin to understand what I'm talking about, some people start to imagine that we have thousands of little robots walking around, and that's spooky, and that frightens them.
Right.
A better way of thinking about it is that these people who've been got by these neuro-linguistic techniques are victims. And so they're not all bad people by any means. Most of them are perfectly ordinary, decent human beings, but unknown to them, they've been given a course which is actually changing the way has changed the way they think.
Yes.
And even if we look at Julia Middleton herself, I've now got neuro-linguistic experts saying to me that when they watch her deliver a talk, and there's some very interesting little video clips on YouTube that she's recently put up.
Yes.
Most people say when they watch her, she's a bit weird, the way her eyes move, the way she uses her hands. But I have now got neuro-linguistic experts saying to me that Julia Middleton herself is showing signs of having been reframed. And that would not surprise me, because obviously the environment that she's been working in with Demos would be the type of environment where these techniques were fermented. If I may, because this will help the historical part of this. If people say, well, no, this can't possibly be true, if you do some research and you go back to a gentleman called Lewin and the Frankfurt School,
yes,
you're going to go back to about 1920s, 1924, when you were starting to see psychologists, and in some cases psychiatrists, starting to take Marxist-type theories and interpret how masses of people could be changed over from a free democratic world into a controlled Soviet or communist world. And a guy called Alexander Luria developed a process which he called the artificial disorganization of behavior. And the techniques were specifically aimed at creating mass social chaos. And in his techniques, he's actually describing specific methods of inducing an artificial disruption of the psyche. He talks about an experimental disorganization of behavior. Now, these people were real. We might regard them as being totally misguided, but they believed in what they were producing. And if you look at the results from experiments, they were showing that their experiments worked. And what I think we've now got happening is that those early techniques for actually getting into communities and destroying the cohesion and the normal operating of a community, those techniques of artificial disorganization of behavior, if you like, have been brought up to date with neuro-linguistic programming and implemented, as I've described, in a sort of pyramid selling situation.
Yeah.
And if I reinforce this for you, if I go to a quote by Richard Bandler, who was one of the two original NLP gurus, in 1997, he is talking about creating a global identity where there will be homogeny, there will be no diversity, no richness, no colour, no difference. Everybody is the same. I think my view of heaven would be a planet like ours, living from the presuppositions of NLP. And he then goes on to say there wouldn't be any more accusations of communism. You're a communist, because effectively everybody would be walking around with the same mentality.
Yeah.
Now that is an extremely knowledgeable and clever, but I would suggest very dangerous man.
Yeah.
And if we then said that his work in neurolinguistics had been swept up by even more dangerous political bodies, we could start to see quite quickly that we would expect major changes in society. And that is what we are actually seeing.
It's just incredible. It's almost like an ideology that has a life of its own in a way. It's spreading almost as a psychological disease. I don't know quite how to pin it down, but what's your ideas about that? It's almost like if people get hooked or...
You are absolutely correct. In you're trying to picture it in your mind as to how this thing works. But if I tell listeners that you can go on the website, go onto the internet and start to Google neuro-linguistic programming, and one of the things you will find is a community of people who have been neuro-linguistically trained. So they have gone on a course, they have been taught how to use neuro-linguistic programming, but at the same time they've also been taught how to go and train other people. And when you go on the websites, and perhaps you go on the website of a consultancy, of a company delivering NLP training, you will invariably find that the trainers talk about other colleagues as though they were all living in a new world. Yeah?
Yeah.
And this is exactly how this is being spread. It is not just through common purpose. I say to a lot of people here, common purpose is a vehicle.
Yes.
It's a Rolls Royce. It's specifically designed to put leaders into positions of power. But the techniques are being used through other vehicles, other courses, including raw neuro-linguistic training. Now, the reason that I am a very happy man at the moment is that I have recently been contacted by several people who are very experienced neuro-linguistic trainers, and far from attacking me, what they've actually said is they are also extremely concerned to see neuro-linguistic techniques being used, the English expression is willy-nilly, being used here and there with no proper control. And that includes within the training for young school children, which is unbelievably serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can talk a few minutes about that, Brian. I want to talk about how this have infected itself into the school system, but also the media connections, the participation of the common purpose agenda by the mainstream media. These are huge problems, and these are places, so to speak, that people go to get information about what is going on in the world. But if they are changing as well, and if they are using some of these techniques as we've been talking about, that could also further spread the agenda, obviously.
Well, not could, they are.
They are, right.
It's
well,
hard
exactly.
to go anywhere better than Britain to see it at the moment.
Yeah.
Because the quality of our national media, whether it's TV or radio or newspapers, has declined dramatically in the last 5 years. We are seeing no real analytical journalism in the national papers. We are seeing an increasingly cartoon look to our national newspapers. And the BBC, which we can prove, and we have proved, is riddled with common purpose graduates, is constantly giving a pro-government political line, to the extent it is very, very rare that the BBC ever shows any news from outside UK. We don't hear what's going on in France and Germany or Sweden or Norway. We only hear very short clipped sound bites as to what is actually happening in Britain. And I believe that this is deliberate manipulation of the national media in order to keep the wider population in UK